Hello, everybody, and welcome back to NASMARB Garage Pass Episode 4. Boy, we just came off of a dominant race at DDT International Raceway, and we're about to jump into it. But first, got to introduce, as always, our NASMARB analysts, Luke and Sham.
Welcome back, everybody.
Nice to be here.
And boy, it was a very interesting race at DDT. It's always a track that throws you a bunch of curveballs. It's the longest track in NASMARB, it's the slowest track in NASMARB, and it really puts the drivers in control of the results. And we're going to get into the race results right now and talk about a couple of the key drivers throughout this race. So, not qualifying right off the bat is Woodpecker, qualified dead last and didn't finish a qualifying lap. They've only finished 3 of 6 qualifying laps total at DDT. Horrible track for Woodpecker, and that was the start of a trend at Red Pandas Racing, as you'll see through these results. The other DNQ was Quillo, who had an extremely slow second lap, which caused them to bump in Prime into the 18th position and not qualify. They were in 4th in the points coming into this race, so a surprising DNQ right there. Finishing in 18th was Murakami, their worst finish of the season. That trend continued with Neptune finishing in 17th, Earl in 16th, Bloodstorm in 15th, all their worst finish of the year. And then we had Winx in 14th, which was their best finish of the season, as they came off of 16th last week, maybe starting to get a little bit more speed in that car. 14th, though, was the best misfortune finish of the race. Very unfortunate race for that team. Mozilla finished in 13th, with Piper finishing in 12th, her first time not in the top 6. And the highest Red Pandas Racing driver this weekend was in the bottom half, and it was Lemon Drizel in 11th, his second worst finish of his entire career. And then the top 10, the top half, was our reigning champion Oak. Prime finished in 9th, and we'll talk about him a little bit more later. Sal finishing in 8th, and Confetti in 7th, their best finish of the season. And the top 6, a surprising one from Nugget in the 99, finishing in 6th, the first Final 6 appearance for Coos Motorsports this season. Streamer finished in 5th after losing for the first time at this track in his career. Spitzer finished in 4th. Electro finished in 3rd, made it to the finals but didn't win a heat there. And then we had Steve finishing in 2nd, his first finals appearance of his career. And Jack Tato, first appearance outside in the final outside of Hyper Speedway, and a dominant victory for Jack Tato at this track. It was a really interesting race. What do we have to jump into right off the bat, Jim?
Yeah, the main topic of the race, honestly, was the underdogs just coming from Supreme. Prime, Nugget, Spitzer, Confetti, all of them very low in the points in the beginning so far, but jumped up to the top 10. All of them also getting their first heat wins of the season, and 2 of the 4 got to the final 6.
Oh yeah, the underdogs definitely showed up for this race, which kind of surprised me a lot. Um, really Spitzer, no really surprise there. This is obviously his best track, so I kind of expected him to back up his performance from last season. Confetti being on one of the second his second best track of his career. A little bit of more so of a surprise between Nugget and Prime being able to show up at DDT as well. I think this definitely shook up a lot of things, especially in the points, with these four kind of showing up out of nowhere. And I think if anything, that might be the turning point for the rest of the season.
Yeah, touching up on further the Prime and Nugget, as we know before, they were the lowest in points, only getting a D and Q and a 18th place. But during their race, something very interesting happened. While they were racing, Prime was about to take the lead to get into the final 6, but his axle ended up snapping. So he immediately pulled over to the side, and Nugget just sped on through to keep doing the race. But it'll be interesting to see how he races the next week with new parts, because obviously his old ones weren't doing that well. So maybe he'll have a little bit more speed in his car after this. It was a little unfortunate because he was about to get to final 6, but who knows? Maybe this could have been a golden opportunity.
It'll certainly be interesting too, because we mentioned at the beginning of this year how with the inserts switching around last year, how that was not going to be possible. And the only way that something gets changed on any of these cars is for something to break. So this early in the season, it is surprising to have an issue like that, a broken axle. We didn't see that but once last year, and it was right before the playoffs started for Streamer, and it ended up going the wrong way for Streamer. But we'll see how it works out for Prime. I know everybody at CCR is going to be really disappointed, though, as they were almost certainly headed to the Final Six after such a horrible start to the season. But it ended up working out for Nugget. They got to their first Final Six, and we'll see if Prime can keep going and get faster this year.
Well, even though we had some highlights from some of the underdogs, we had some lowlights from some of the top dogs, specifically Red Pandas Racing. Not at all what we expected from such a powerhouse team. Out of all four of these drivers, we only had one of them, Lemon Drizel, qualify in the top 10 of this race, and one of them, Woodpecker, as you mentioned, Hershey, did not qualify for the race. But furthermore, not a single one of them had finished in the top 10. Whether you call it bad luck or just missed the setup, I think I think it might be just a mixture of both, but more so to over to Drizel and Piper, both of them, they I think just had really tough matchups. Um, Nothing really much that they could have done there. They were facing some of the fastest cars on the day. They tried to put up a good effort. I think they tried their best, but no matter what way you slice it, a lot of unfortunate things can happen in this series, and for once, Red Pandas Racing kind of drew the short end of the stick.
Yeah, certainly, with DDT, and we kind of saw this last year too, with the underdogs really playing a big role here. And this race in particular shifted the standings, the start of the shift of the standings last year. And so it'll be interesting to see if that trend continues and those lower guys in the standings going into this race will continue to have success. And if these top dogs, Red Pandas Racing, Misfortune Racing, if they'll continue to struggle or maybe not be quite as dominant as they were in the first couple of races of the season. So with all of those top dogs kind of out of the picture, we had an interesting finals, and it started with Steve. Luke, what did you see from Steve this week?
Well, I tell you, I think I saw some flashes of a superstar in the making. Steve had a career day here at DDT. The man had 7 heat wins in a single race, the most of his career. The previous best of him was 3 heat wins, twice actually. Not to mention making it to the finals and for the first time ever of his career. Steve was up against some very tough matchups. In the first round, he was up against Drizel. He was actually almost able to defeat him in the very first run up, and he actually swept the former champion Oak in the next heat, who actually had the fastest lap in the heat prior. Oak did. So Steve had some really fast cars that he was up against, and actually he was up against Spitzer as well. And Spitzer's also known to have some really good speed here at DDT, and he was actually able to sweep him as well. I think Steve really had a great chance to uh, make a statement to win the race up against Jack Tato, but all in all, still a very great effort for Steve. Had he not gotten loose as many times as he did coming down onto the final straightaway, I think we would have seen a much more competitive matchup between those two.
Yeah, and Steve was extremely fast, and it's a little bit overlooked with Jack Tato having the most points scored in any event in NASMARB history with his fast laps, his pole. But Steve was extremely fast too, had one of the fastest laps in qualifying, the outside lane fastest lap. He also had 3 individual fastest laps in the race leading into the final. So it was a really impressive day for Steve. Obviously, he had a really loose car, and that kind of bit him there at the end, but a very, very strong day for Steve and really showed the speed that they've had in qualifying, but this time he was able to translate it to the race, and we'll see if he can continue that this season. So one of the drivers that was in the final that kind of ended up in the background because I believe he only finished 1 heat was Electro. Qualified third, finished third, pretty quiet day overall, but still a good bounce back from a DQ in the last race. He's been very up and down in his career. We'll see if there will be more ups than downs coming up, but this was certainly a good start to get him back on the right path. And then we had the race winner, Jack Tato. And Shem, you picked Jack Tato last week. Did you think that he was going to pull off a win at DDT?
Absolutely not, because he has 0 career DDT heat wins. Every win in his statistic there now is from this specific race. So for like, if it was at Hyper, I could understand that, but here, complete different Jack Tato from season 1. He has so much more speed under the hood, because he has a 3 average qualifying right now, which is very good for Jack Tato. So this is a completely different Jack Tato. He killed it in the DDT heats. He took out Streamer, the 2-time champion here last time. It was a very good heat between the two of them and ended up 2-2, but Jack Tato getting the final heat. But there's a lot to show for Jack Tato in this race, and I'm very interested to see if he'll be keeping this up for the rest of the races and during the playoffs.
Yeah, Jack Tato definitely, surprised me as well, turning a lot of heads his way. This is truly probably one of the more better dominant races that any of us have ever seen up until this point. Um, of course, coming off of a second place last race and now a win this race, I think Jack Tato definitely is starting to improve a lot, and I'm very interested to see if he can continue this streak going.
Yeah, and you mentioned, with his almost max point day, he was insane at DDT, scoring 48 points with the second place, followed by the first place in dominant fashion. This leads us into the overall standings through 3 races, and suddenly Jack Tato has doubled his point total and is in the lead, passes up Lemon Drizel with his 11th place finish this weekend. So he made up enough points on Drizel to actually pass him up. He's sitting at 96 points right now, which is 2 points up on Lemon Drizel, who has 94. And then it drops significantly down to Steve, who has 77 points. So a pretty big gap for the top 2 so far, who have made a couple of finals and both finished first and second in the first 3 races. That's followed by Piper, who's just a point behind Steve. Neptune sits in 5th with Streamer, Oak, Bloodstorm, the next 3, with Quillo, Sal, Electro, and Earl, the final 4 in the playoffs. Quillo dropped from 4th to 9th after not qualifying, but still in by a decent amount so far. We've got Electro, who found his way back into the playoffs after this race, after DQing the last race. But all of a sudden, we also have Spitzer. Spitzer, sitting in 13th, is just 5 points out. Had a really nice run at this race last weekend. We've got Murakami sitting in 14th, Confetti in 15th. Mazilla's really struggled this year, sitting in 16th, and that's certainly surprising because he was one of the highest, actually I think he was overall the highest point scorer without a win last year, so he's been really struggling with this new team this year, with Woodpecker sitting in 17th place, Nugget sitting in 18th, Prime in 19th, and Winx has dropped down to the bottom of the standings, being passed up by Prime, with Prime's 9th place finish this weekend. So the standings are spread out once you get to the bottom, but it's very close around the cut line and most of those spots in the playoffs, and there's still a lot of jockeying to be had for position, and headed into the getting towards the second half of the season. It's going to be interesting to watch these points battles.
Yeah, and Hershey, just wanting to point out just one more thing regarding the standings. I think it's very interesting that out of the current drivers who are above the cutoff, 7 out of 12 of these drivers have all made a finale appearance in some way, shape, or form. And I'm going to be looking more closely towards the guys who are around 9th and 10th, Quillo, Sal, with Quillo just now coming off of a DNQ and Sal being fairly inconsistent. Like we know Sal has the speed, but just not some really good finishes for that number 1 car. But if they are gonna have any chance of making these playoffs after the regular season, they're gonna have to start putting up some really good points days, because over half of these drivers have already had their standout performances. So if they want a chance, they're gonna have to start making some moves very soon.
Yeah, and certainly I think a lot more pressure is now going to be put onto these teams because they saw so quickly all those guys you may have written off already at this point, with Prime, Spitzer, Confetti and Nugget all doing so well, that puts a lot more pressure on the guys who maybe thought they were safe. That's like, oh, well, there's still a lot of time that we can lose points to these guys if they continue to perform well, coming up at Mayhem or the next time we come to DDT. So it would be certainly interesting to see how those guys perform and see if they can have those standout days to really prove they belong in those playoffs.
It'll especially be very dangerous because from 7th to 12th is a 7-point window. So even though the 13 is a little bit under that by 5, very close between those 6 seeds of getting into the playoffs.
Yeah, and certainly that's heavily aided by this race with everything kind of tightening up here. So it's going to be a very interesting race, a very exciting race for who makes the playoffs going down the stretch. So headed into our race picks section, we'll talk about last week's picks. And these ones didn't go quite as well for you guys, but we're still going to break them down. Sham, your underdog pick was Oak, who had a couple of 5th places coming into this race. What have you seen from Oak in this race and in particular just this season in general?
He's honestly just been kind of solid. He hasn't done very many insane things thus far. It was nice to see that he got one fastest lap heat in the group stage for this race, but it's just been pretty solid races for Oak, getting into the final 6 or the final 12, but he has not had anything stellar thus far. Just kind of average racing, getting some good points, and having fun out there.
Well, you gotta always remember that Oak is the defending champion of the series, so there's definitely a lot of pressure that Oak is feeling right now just to live up to that order of him being the previous series champion. I think he's doing just about as much as he can do right now. He's being consistent enough to where he is still in the playoffs at the moment. I think Oak will be all right.
Yeah, and he's actually, we've talked about it a lot, but he's in a better points position right now than he was at this point last season. So the consistency is important at the beginning of the year because really you can't count on what happened last year. You can't count on him catching fire like he did last year, consistently running in the top 6. So he's done what he needs to do at this point to make the playoffs. So we'll see how he does for the rest of the season. And going into Luke's underdog pick, actually had the best qualifying performance of any of your 4 picks. Bloodstorm qualified in 5th, but he finished in 15th and didn't make it out of the group stage.
Yeah, well, I think someone needs to put one of those shamrocks on his car that that Sal has, because man, Bloodstorm just is unlucky. He just could not catch a break for the second time in a row. Being a DDT streamer just constantly has screwed him over, despite being faster and also just flat out just turning down right into him, just slowing him down right from the get go. And then in the second race matchup in that first group, this streamer kind of forced him into a mistake and he wrecked from it. I definitely think that Bloodstorm could have definitely had a shot at having a chance at possibly making it to the finals, but if not, definitely a final 6 appearance. But man, Bloodstorm just needs some luck on his side. That car is fast, but he just cannot keep away from anybody.
Yeah, of all the group stages in there, he was definitely in one of the worst ones. Very competitive with Streamer, the 2-time winner, and Oak, the previous champion. Just, there's not much you can really do when that happens.
And you mentioned that he basically got taken out of this race by a streamer. First of all, you got to give props to streamer, forcing him into mistakes. That's what good drivers do, especially when they may not have their best car. And that's what we're going to talk about next because Sham, you picked streamer. He was the highest finisher of any of your picks this week. He did make it to the final 6. It was his first loss at this track. And what did you see from the 26?
Yeah, a lot of the times after he came off of turn 2, he would always spin up to the top of the track. Sometimes it didn't really affect anything that much, but I think 1 or 2 times there, he actually ended up losing the heat because of that. So I feel like it was still a good performance in Streamer. Obviously, you can't be upset with a top 6 appearance, but for the 2-time track winner, it was definitely a little bit of a blown opportunity.
Yeah, and streamer obviously he's very fast here. Had a fast car. He had, I believe he was third or fourth in the first lap in qualifying. So he had speed in it, but he was very, very loose, clearly. So that played a factor in where he finished in this race. for Luke, you picked Le Mondrizel for the second race in a row, and unfortunately, this was his worst finish of the season.
Well, you know what? You gotta give Drizel some props. It was really exciting to see both of Shem and mine's winner picks go at it in the final 12, just to see who really could come out on top. Obviously, Streamer did end up defeating Drizel, but you have to give Drizel props. Drizel had potential to get around Streamer more than once, but Streamer was just able to fend him off at the right place at the right time. Drizel had decent speed. I feel like he could have won at least one of their races, but just a fatal mistake by Drizel not taking the run to the outside just ends up pushing Streamer up to the finish to make him advance onto the next round. But you know, I had confidence in my pick with Drizel. He's a great driver. Like I said before, you can't bet against him, but you also couldn't bet against Streamer. I think that matchup right there really showed a lot of class between two of arguably the greatest drivers in the series right now.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting to see both our winner picks, Drizel, Streamer, two of the best drivers, go up at it in DDT. I feel like if you're looking at it from a standpoint, I feel like it is pretty hard for Drizel to end up beating Streamer in this, as it was a 2-0. But yeah, I mean, Drizel definitely did not do poor in the matchup. He did almost get a run on Streamer to take the 1-1 lead tiebreaker, but it just I feel like it would be really hard to count Streamer out of the 1v1 in this specific heat.
If you want my honest opinion, I think could have been just nerves. Drizel knew that he was facing the undefeated champion of this track, and it just got to the better of him. We very rarely ever see Le Mondrizel make a mistake at all, and we just did witness him make one of the most fatal mistakes that any driver could have ever made, having a run on the leader, but not taking the run to the outside or to the inside at the right time. I think this was just a case of two of the best drivers going at it, and neither of them would allow the other to pass them.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. That is definitely. I mean, we've seen Drizel make these passes even in the last couple of races, and that really is probably the first mistake of the whole season we've seen him make. You never know what would happen on the third heat there, because that would have just tied it. We would have had one more heat there, and who knows, Streamer may have won that one anyways. But certainly a mistake from Drizel, which is out of character for sure. So next week we head to probably the most chaotic track, the most destructive track on the circuit. Mayhem Super Speedway is up next, and everything you know right now could be thrown out the window, but I'm interested to see who you guys think will tame this crazy track. So Luke, who is your favorite to win the race this weekend?
Well, we have seen so far this season drivers at their best tracks take advantage of the most. And that's exactly where I'm heading. The driver who I believe who is one where it's his best track and I think has the best chance of getting out of the slump that he's in right now and taming the most chaotic track of the series, I think it's Mozilla. I think Mozilla is going to be able to win this race. He finished second in the Misfortune 400 here. Started off very strongly with a 3-0-0 sweep to start before he unfortunately lost the next 7 races after that. But the stats don't lie for Mozilla. He has a 3.5 average finish here and a combined total of 14 career heat wins. If there's anything that I think that Mozilla will be able to get out of this slump that he's in right now, this is his track to do it. And he's going to get that very first win for his season and for his career.
Well, that is certainly an interesting pick, especially because Who's Motorsports has struggled a lot. Mozilla has struggled a lot. And you are correct, this is definitely his best track. He was a heat win away from a winning last year. We'll see if he can replicate that and maybe do one better this weekend. Sham, who is your your favorite to win the race?
Mine is a pretty similar background of it, but it is for Confetti of Fortune Racing. I feel it's very similar to Mozilla. He started off not the best here, but I think that's just Confetti himself. I don't think he's very good at Spiral or Hyperspeedway, but pretty good at DDT and Mayhem. He has a third and a fourth finish here, and was almost able to get into the final six in the playoffs last year. Because Mayhem was the initial track setup for the beginning, and was able to beat Prime, a winner, and get into the final, and was able to get into the final eight. However, he was knocked out there in that, and then also did not advance in the loser or in the last chance. But I feel like Confetti, of all of the tracks, this is definitely one of his best ones. Similar to what Luke's saying in the Mozilla pick of like, this is their time to now show that they can get into the course, get a career win, just like Jack Tato and Neptune, their first ever wins, and be able to now get into the playoffs of season 2 and start their career.
Yeah, Confetti certainly, I think, potentially, besides coming into the season at Jack Tato at Hyper, may have been the starkest difference between from one track to all the other tracks. Very strong at Mayhem, like you said, was able to advance in the playoffs, beating Prime, who had nearly just won the race at Mayhem the week before, and very nearly took out the number 1 seed in Streamer in that last chance. So he's certainly very good here, and we'll see what he can do with this new Fortune Racing 7. So now that we got our top picks out of the way, this is where it gets interesting. Luke, who do you have as your underdog winner?
Well, we've seen where a lot of the underdog picks or the underdog drivers seem to do really well here. We've seen Confetti do well here. We've seen Woodpecker do well. Heck, we've even seen Murakami come out of nowhere and do well here. Well, I'm gonna pick another one of these underdogs, and I'm gonna pick Mozilla's teammate. I think Nugget has the potential to do really well here. He finished 8th here, which was his second best finish of his career up until the most previous race. Nugget should be a lot better at this type of track as opposed to his other tracks. And I think Nugget has some momentum on his side coming off of that great performance that he had this past week at DDT. So I think I'm gonna pick the Kuz Motorsports drivers. I think they're gonna show up to Mayhem, and I think finally they're gonna finally prove to themselves that they're here to play.
That certainly is an underdog pick.
Yeah, well, I mean, Nugget, like you said, they're coming off of their second best finish of their career. And that's the best finish so far for Kuz Motorsports in their first year. So that would certainly be an upset. I don't think a lot of people would be picking Nugget in this situation, but that's a bold choice, and we'll see how it ends up. You know, they've got some momentum, and if they can carry it, maybe they'll get close to the playoffs. And like, if your prediction is correct, they'd be locked in. So it'll be interesting to see what Nugget can do coming off of that 6th place finish last week. Sham, who do you have as your underdog pick for this weekend?
It's actually quite funny that Luke and I are in the exact same thing, but just different teams, because I'm picking Confetti's teammate, Sal, also of Fortune Racing. So Luke and I are both thinking a team pick here, but just different ones. I think Sal, he's had a iffy yes-no season thus far. A good 1, bad 2, good 3. So I think he'll be able to pull it out here in the 4th. He's also been pretty strong in Mayhem. Maybe since Sal and Confetti being teammates, Confetti will be able to share some of the knowledge, be able to get Sal just as good. They'll be able to take it out together. I'm definitely interested to see, because Sal has 2 very good qualifyings here, but only 1 good finish. But that's being a Final 3, one of his career. But yeah, I definitely think this could be a very good race for Sal.
Well, you know what? I won't lie. Sham, your picks were going to be probably very similar to mine because I originally thought of picking one of either Sal or Confetti for one of my picks. So I think you've got a really good lineup there. I think we both have some really good lineups going into Mayhem.
Yeah. I was thinking maybe a Mozilla. Definitely not Nugget though, but I think of those three, maybe an underdog Nugget pick. I think those should be some pretty good picks.
Boy, maybe a rookie two car team rivalry brewing here with Coos Motorsports, Fortune Racing, the two new teams. Hey, we'll see. Those are certainly interesting picks, especially because we haven't necessarily seen the raw speed from any of them at this point. But going to Mayhem, they've all had some success at that track, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Sometimes at Mayhem, you don't even need raw speed. You just need to make sure that you're driving well and not wrecking. And even that will just get you points. So I think all of them should be able to do that and will be able to do well.
That's definitely a fair point because we know that Woodpecker had some insane speed at this race last year. After they had their insert swap, they set the track record. They sat on the pole, but they didn't even make the final three because they couldn't keep the wheels on the track. So that's definitely another factor when you go to Mayhem is keep the car on the track, and you never know what'll happen in front of you. Cars go flipping, they go off the track. So it'll be certainly is going to be a crazy race, unless something is changed dramatically, which I don't think it has at Mayhem Super Speedway. And with that, we wrap up NASMARB Garage Pass Episode 4. We thank you for joining us. Make sure you tune in to the Misfortune 400 qualifying will be tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. The race will be Friday at the same time, 7 p.m. Eastern. Make sure you tune in. It's going to be a crazy race, I promise. Mayhem never disappoints. But until next time, this has been Hershey with Luke and Sham, and we will see you next week.